Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome, my dear faves, to the 6th part of What If Ace Was Stuck in a Time Loop. Credit goes to jgginmeg for this fantastic fanfic. Link is in the description for those who prefer to read, or want to contact the author. Chapter 16. Arrival and Misunderstandings. Sabo looked up at the early morning sky. He breathed in the scent of the salty air, and then went on his way to prepare for his arrival on Foodvilton. Looking through a spyglass, he spotted Whitebeard's proud flag flying high in the distance. Funnily enough, he'd just come from the Whitebeard pirate's ship. Throwing down the anchor, the blonde revolutionary hopped off the ship onto the docking area of the port on the island. He paid the fee, not wanting to risk stirring trouble on the Yonkos territory. Now where was he supposed to meet the other revolutionaries? He huffed, trying to remember the directions Koala had given him. Maybe he shouldn't have hung up the den so early. Right. Towards the western side, where he'd see the cliff with the eucalyptus tree. Sabo frowned as the presence following him reappeared again. How annoying. Although he dismissed it as nothing, a churning feeling in his stomach told him differently. Whoever it was hadn't attacked yet though, so he had no reason to. For all he knew, Whitebeard's dog could have tailed him, and he was worrying over nothing. As he went through the entrance, another Whitebeard flag. He was greeted by an old man wearing multiple feathers, for whatever reason, on his head. Well, different islands had different cultures, and he supposed that this wouldn't have been the strangest thing he'd seen on the Grand Line. The old man talked in a language he didn't understand, with animated hand gestures that seemed to be friendly. Welcoming, even. At the very least, it didn't seem to be an island of cannibals. Sabo suppressed shuddered as he remembered that incident. The revolutionary put on his best and what he hoped was a charming smile. The old man nodded his approval, and took him by the forearm, dragging him into the town. Well, at least Sabo had a guide now. And the man had a surprisingly strong grip for someone so old and frail looking. Then again, Koala was a very petite woman, yet she was strong as fucking. Delivered the most powerful and painful bitch slaps. The old man eventually let go of his forearm and went to go talk to the other town's occupants, and Sabo took the chance to sprint the hell out, because if he was late Koala was going to murder him 6 ways to Sunday. So panicked was he about the prospect of being late that he didn't notice the presence approaching behind him. Whack! Teach smirked as his den rang. He allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before he picked it up. I got him, boss. The voice sounded unusually thick. Teach hummed thoughtfully. Did they get a hit on you? Quote. The snail frowned, and, Doc, responded with, yeah, got a nasty punch to the noggin. Fucker broke it. So I broke his arm. Well, just be more careful next time. You can't get caught, especially when we're this close. Got that? I'll take care of the situation here. Teach dropped his voice lower, whispering conspiratorially. They're already framing him for Whitebeard's trip to the infirmary that resulted in his absence on deck yesterday. They hate him now, and he'll be gone at any time. The snail bobbed its head in agreement. So what do you want me to do with the bastard? Quote. Teach grinned. Hand him over to the Marines. We can make good money. Especially since he's the brother of Goldie Rogers' kid. Crash. Ace had just finished his latest assassination attempt, for what seemed to be the 5th time that day. Apparently his worries were for nothing, since the Yonko was back on deck, strong as ever. The fire user winced as he crashed through a majority of the ship, passing over the railing as he fell into the dark depths of the sea below. Cursing, he attempted to right himself, channeling his fire power to the soles of his feet, but to no avail. His mind was too scattered, too fractured, too broken to even focus on saving his own life. But it was okay. He'd just reset again, in a different loop. He wouldn't die. Then he was drowning again. Ace tried to hold his breath, and the minutes trickled by. His lungs screamed under the strain, and he began to panic, limbs flailing. He was drowning, and the loop would reset, and he tried to hold his breath but he simply couldn't. The last few precious bubbles of air escaped his mouth. And he was trapped, again. He wasn't free. The familiar feeling of weakness washed over him, not unlike the seastone shackles in the past. He was scared. He was very afraid. It was pitch black around him, and he was blinded, and he was weak, and he was sinking. Soon he would be out of reach and die, only to wake up again. The Logia wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. He wanted it all to just end already, damn it. His vision began to go dark. How long was it now? The minutes felt like hours, each second ticking by tortuously, agonizingly slow. Maybe the Whitebeard pirates had given up. Maybe they simply didn't care anymore. His body went limp. And the thought of it hurt. It felt worse than getting tortured by Teach, getting punched by Akainu, getting his limbs pulled out of their sockets one by one as he tried to scream and his throat grew raw, blood pouring from his mouth. Don't go there. The darkness sucked out his will to live, suffocating him, pressuring him, and why couldn't the suffering just end? Why? He closed his eyes, certain that no one was going to save him. Again. Certain that he would die alone, knowing that he shouldn't have been born. Again. The murky seawater of the new world closed around him, almost as if finalizing his watery grave. And he would die. Again. I wanna live life fast, I don't know how to slow down. Wanna get high, I don't know how to come down. Help me now, I'm running on empty. And I don't wanna be a memory. Marco wanted to scream at Pop's stupidity. He was not supposed to be out on deck yet, but the old pirate insisted on making an appearance to show that he was okay. Pops was not okay. He was quite good at hiding the fact though. But obviously the stubborn asshole couldn't control his strength yet, the drugs in his system still affecting him. It was quite obvious, seeing as the fire brat was sent flying high over the railings, into the water below. Not to mention that he was sent pretty far away from the ship, not just over the railing. Hell, he was fucking soaring like a bullet through the air. Marco could see the Logia trying to light his feet on fire, for some reason, but the sparks sputtered and died out. He heard the splash, the telltale sign of Ace going into the ocean. The deck was silent for a second, pirates doing their normal duties, unable to comprehend that Ace was a devil fruit user. A devil fruit user that had just been thrown into the sea. A devil fruit user that was unable to swim. Then someone shouted, "Get Namur!" And the crew erupted into chaos and noise. The fishman heroically jumped over the railing, braving the treacherous waters of the new world to save Ace. Pirates waited with bated breath, although some looked pleased. Happy, even. A flare of fury spiked within the Phoenix, and as Marco looked over at Thatch he noticed that Thatch looked livid, obviously noting the facial expressions of some of the crew members. The cook made it as if he was thinking to reprimand them rather violently, but Marco put a hand on his shoulder. Now was not the time. Minutes passed, and Marco recalled something he'd read in a medical book before. 1 minute and the brain cells begin to die. Namur surfaced, expression grim, as he carried Ace's motionless, pale body, no sign of life. His chest wasn't moving, his face clammy. 3 minutes and there is likely to be serious brain damage. Thatch cursed, and Bay pushed her way through the crowd of chattering pirates, dropping down next to Ace as she checked for a pulse. She looked up, the only sign of her concern in her eyes. "How long has it been?" Quote. "I don't know," Thatch croaked. 10. 11. Quote. Marco's breath caught in his throat. 10 minutes and the patient is unlikely to recover. Bay rammed her hands into Ace's chest, pressing it rhythmically, series after series of chest compressions. Minutes passed, and the crew's low chatter steadily grew louder. Marco noted Pop's horrified face and couldn't bring himself to berate the Yonko for what he had done. 15 minutes, and recovery may be impossible. "Marco, get over here and help me out," Bay hissed at the other doctor. The blonde pirate sidled up to the other, and pressed his hands to Ace's chest. He pressed it harder than Bay had. 2 more minutes passed. After a particularly hard compression, Ace gasped, coughing up water as he curled into a fetal position almost protectively, arms hugging his sides as he choked and retched. Bay rubbed her hand on his back soothingly, although Ace didn't seem to notice. "All right, get back to work, people," Thatch barked, taking on the role of the 4th Division commander. "This ain't a show." Quote. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, people leaving in small groups of 2s and 3s, muttering incomprehensible sentences under their breath. Words filled the air like an annoying buzz or hum, and Marco noticed that Ace shook, hands covering his ears, eyes squeezed tight. Then the fire user got up, running to the side of the ship as he hurled and retched, "Gods, was that blood?" Bay cursed, realizing that some of Ace's wounds had reopened. "All right, you're coming with me," she said, snapping her fingers and doing her best to maintain a glare, attempting to cover the obvious concern shining in her eyes. And for the first time since he'd been thrown overboard, Ace looked up, and Marco had to hold back a gasp because fuck, he could see in his eyes, he looked shattered and broken and tired, and it was wrong. Thatch was not as subtle in hiding his observations, an audible breath escaping from his lips. Marco resisted the urge to step on the cook's toes. Pops looked down gravelly. "I'm sorry, my son. I was wrong. I should not have." "Don't call me that," Ace hissed, his voice raspy as he cut him off. "I am not your son and I never will be. Get that through your thick heads." Thatch stepped forward, eyes soft and pleading, as he opened his mouth. Before he could say a word, Ace silenced him with a scathing glare, shaking his head, all signs of weakness gone. "Don't. Just don't." And the way Ace said it sounded harsh, but almost like a plea. The Logia pushed past them, steps quickening as he ran off, presumably to hide in the depths of the ship. Whitebeard watched with mournful eyes as if someone had just murdered Stefan. He asked softly, "Oh, my children, what have we done wrong?" Quote. No one answered him. "Am I the only one that's coming, unglued? Emotions building up, they start to run you. Bottles on the shelf I'm about to run through. Doing everything I wish that I can undo." Ace winced as he hid at the belly of the ship. He was not proud of hiding. He hated hiding. He also hated the fact that he almost drowned, and he was fucking bleeding out. Damn, wounds probably got infected again. Sighing, he shuddered. Fuck, he hated the sea. Well, he didn't hate the sea, exactly, but he hated the feeling of weakness that washed over him every time he took a dip in there. It wasn't his first time drowning, and he was used to the feeling. It was just unpleasant and brought up memories that would probably get him locked up in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. That is, if the Whitebeard pirates somehow found out about it. They wouldn't. Ace had made sure of that. The corners of his lips tugged downwards, and he felt the familiar feeling of tears pricking at the corner of his eyes, a heavy lump in his throat. Ace swallowed, trying to rid himself of both the lump and the sour aftertaste in his mouth he'd gotten from fucking puking off the side of the Moby. He had puked in front of everyone, hadn't he? How embarrassing. Ace couldn't bring himself to feel mortified though, instead he just felt tired. He wouldn't sleep though, he wouldn't let himself, because he didn't feel like slipping into the nightmares. The bad nightmares. Maybe there were certain pills that could prevent dreams. The Grand Line was unpredictable, after all. The fire user smirked bitterly. He hadn't predicted getting stuck in a time loop for the rest of eternity, and he hadn't predicted himself going fucking insane during the time. Ace's mind briefly wandered to Sabo, and he wondered if his brother was okay. He quickly dismissed the thought though, his brother was strong and could take care of himself perfectly fine. His heavy eyelids slowly closed, and Ace found himself nodding off. With his energy depleted, he couldn't bring himself to do or feel anything. The Logia's head jerked up when a familiar pulse of hockey crackled around the ship. Izu frowned at the ship in the distance, rubbing his eyes and blinking them. That was the Red Force's pirate flag. Shank's pirate flag. Shit. Racing down from the crow's nest, the Okama rang the alarm bell, shouting out warnings about the approaching Yonko. Marco and Thatch were the first on deck, Pops looking at the approaching ship with visible concern in his eyes. Now, of all times. Thatch bemoaned. Couldn't he have picked a better day to visit us? Quote. Obviously the crew, besides him, or at least Marco, Thatch, and Pops, were still shaken up by Ace's burst of anger and vulnerability. Dealing with teenagers, especially ones that could change their feelings like a flip of a switch, was seriously aggravating. Not that Izu was mad at Ace or anything, it wasn't his fault. Marco watched, annoyed, as Shanks boarded the ship, grinning carefree as he swung a huge jug of sake. Conqueror's hockey rolled out in waves, resulting in the newer members of the Whitebeard pirates falling one by one. Blowing out a breath, he shouted, "Oi! Do you mind controlling your hockey a bit?" Quote. Shanks grinned at Marco, tone flippant. "Oops. My bad. Care to join my crew, Turkey?" Quote. Marco was prepared to set the red-haired pirate on fire. Sadly he couldn't, as he had to show restraint as the first mate and division commander of the Whitebeard pirates. So instead he replied with an aggravated, "Hell, no. My loyalties lie with Pops." Quote. Meh. Thatch had to physically restrain Marco from going full Phoenix on the Yonko. Anyways. Shanks looked up cheerfully at Whitebeard, fully unaware of the situation that had just transpired. "I came to see a friend, possibly nephew. You might know him, his name's Portgas D. Ace." Quote. Murmurs were heard in the background, and Marco dragged a hand down his face. "Oh, fuck me, yoy. What the actual hell?" Whitebeard stepped forward, face grim. "Ace is currently unavailable. You see, he's kind of hurt. And his wounds may or may not have reopened. And he may be bleeding somewhere right now, and one of our doctors is trying to find him." Marco watched, entranced and slightly concerned, as Shank's expressions shifted from happy to confused to mad, then just not mad, to downright murderous. The air crackled and Shank's unscarred eye twitched. What? Chapter 17. Ace was fucked. Okay, so first he had some minor breakdowns. Then, Sabo proceeded to he didn't want to think about the other breakdown. And then, he almost drowned. Again. Yup. Everything was just peachy. Except for the fact that a fucking Yonko was now on the ship, namely red-haired Shanks, and his crew. Ace did recall that he was on good terms the last time they had met, in one of the loops, but why were they here? Question mark. Maybe it was a stroke of luck, bad luck. Maybe it was karma from treating his family, the Whitebeard pirates, like assholes. Or maybe it was something else entirely. But what other ulterior motive would Shanks have? So yes, Ace was fucked, but at least he probably wouldn't be able to sleep for a long time. Probably. He suddenly felt the unreasonable urge to cackle madly and loudly to, well, absolutely no one. Damn. That was probably the first sign that he was slowly cracking. He really should feel very concerned that he didn't care, but oh well. A smile tugged at the edges of his lips, and he grinned, a twisted sort of smile. Snap out of it, damn it. Ace pinched himself, returning to the harsh, cruel reality that he was in, which only reminded himself of the current situation. Oh no, Ace thought, mock horrified. I'm losing my sanity, not that I had any to begin with, anyway. Wincing, Ace stood up, swaying slightly on his feet as dark spots danced before his eyes. The fact that someone was yelling from the main deck didn't help either, as his headache only grew worse. Ace dearly hoped that he would not throw up again. Vaguely, he heard Shank's voice yelling, "What did you do to Ace?" Exclamation mark. Question mark. Exclamation mark. And said person groaned, because of course, as fate would have it, the Yonko was looking for him. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he was not on good terms with Shanks. What had he done to piss him off now? Ace closed his eyes, trying to remember, memories from past loops and dead corpses flooding, burning the images into his brain. He was in the present, not the past, and he couldn't remember either. Fuck. The chances were, though, that someone would come looking for him, and Ace knew that somehow he would, as always, inevitably be found. There was no escape. No escape. So Ace chose a different option. They wouldn't go to him, he would go to them, and whatever pain or torture he would receive, well, he would just take it. Accept it. There was really no point in fighting anymore. The pyromaniac walked, slowly, like a man to his own execution, the only sound being his heavy breath from the strain of his bloodied wounds. Funnily enough, if he could recall, he had been executed before in many timelines out of the hundreds. But at the moment he was fine, as always. He'd dealt with worse. The searing, burning pain in his back said differently. Slowly, the commotion grew louder and louder, the pounding in Ace's head returning full force. Shanks was positively pissed. Pissed with a capital P, because it was necessary. He was no longer the childish, jovial, joking captain that his crewmates were familiar with. On the contrary, he looked ready to kill. Because if the Whitebeard pirates hurt his former captain's son, there would be hell to pay. Okay, so maybe Ace hadn't exactly said that he was the Pirate King's son. But it was pretty obvious. He used the name, Portgas, for obvious reasons. And anyone close to Gul D. Roger knew that the captain's lover was pregnant. The crew just didn't know if the child had survived or not. The resemblance was uncanny, anyway. The freckles, stormy gray eyes, the facial structure, the monstrous strength for someone so young. Shanks supposed that being the cabin boy on Roger's crew made him Ace's uncle. He didn't know if Buggy or Rayleigh knew about Ace's survival though. After that incident on Baterilla, they must have presumed him dead. But surely they must have seen the wanted posters and Ace's face on the front page of the newspapers. Maybe they just didn't make the connection. In all honesty, Shanks was ready to fight, and if necessary, kill the pirates before him. That would disrupt the power systems though, but he didn't really care at the moment. All that mattered now was if Ace was safe or not. The red-haired Yonko growled, grip tightening on Griffin. "I'll give you one more chance, Whitebeard. Where is Ace?" Quote. The older pirate's brow furrowed, a hint of impatience bleeding into his tone. "I told you, we don't know. Enough with that shit. If Ace is hurt, I swear to God." Ben stepped forward, ready to calm his captain, because starting a fucking war with the Whitebeard pirates was decidedly not smart. Lucky Roo, also sensing the danger, tensed. On the other side, Marco was ready to fight if need be, but also ready to fall back on Oyaji's command. He didn't pretend to understand Whitebeard's thoughts, even though he was the first mate, and right now he was just confused. Something was amiss. Why would red-haired Shanks care so much about Portgas D? Ace, superstar rookie. Cough. The tension was so thick that it could be cut with a knife. Cough. Frowning, Marco turned his head to see who the fuck was coughing at such an inappropriate time, then almost choked on his saliva. Standing at a doorway, in all his bloody glory, was one Portgas D. Ace, stitches torn as he breathed heavily, his injuries obviously taking a toll on him. No one else seemed to notice. Marco stepped forward cautiously, then took another step and another until he reached Oyaji. Shanks didn't bother to glance at him, keeping his eyes trained on Whitebeard, hockey pulsing dangerously in the air. Oyaji. Whitebeard's eyes snapped to Marco. "What is it?" Quote. Marco merely pointed in the direction of Ace, noting how Shanks' gaze seemed to follow. Whitebeard looked too, cursing under his breath as he quickly turned back to Shanks. Or where Shanks was supposed to be. Ace. Quote. The Yonko had sheathed his weapon, sprinting towards the fire user. Ace remained in place, stiff, almost unafraid as Shanks approached closer. And closer. The Logia tried hard not to flinch, tried to keep his expression apathetic and his terror at bay as the fear swallowed him up, suffocated him. So this is how he'd die. Not by Teach's hand, or Akainu's, not tortured, or drowned, or by being mobbed by his fellow Nakama. No, he'd be killed by Shanks. He'd never thought he'd see the day. Shanks was in front of him, frowning as he crouched down at eye level. Ace could see the concern directed at him, as if he were some fragile piece of glass or a poor little baby bird with broken wings, unable to fly. And it made him bristle inside. Ace. Ace. Quote. Oh, that's why he looks so concerned, because my eyes are unfocused, I guess. I don't think that's normal. Oh yeah, it could also be because of the reopened wound in my back and the fact that I'm fucking bleeding right now. Although, if I bleed out then I suppose that would save me the trouble of getting killed by a Yonko, again. Whoopee. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, with a field full of flowers. I just love talking sarcastically to myself, in my head. So much fun. Dying is fun. Life is fun, especially when you're immortal and you get to watch your family die in front of you again and again and again. I just love watching the people I love the most get brutally murdered or backstabbed in front of me. In a cycle, with no escape. For the second time that day, Ace's vision started going dark, and this time it wasn't because of the lack of air. He didn't notice Shanks place his hand on his shoulder, talking fast about something being okay. Unlikely. Ace's feet gave out under him, betraying him as he crumpled in a heap to the floor. I'm by myself. And why won't no one help? I know this can't be healthy. So I'm looking for a way out. Shanks caught Ace as he fell, cursing as he made a promise to himself to murder Whitebeard and his crew later. He gathered the Logia in his arms, glaring daggers at the surrounding pirates as he walked back to his crewmates. I'm borrowing him, the Yonko said, daring anyone to challenge him. No one did. Whitey Bay stepped up, opening her mouth then closing it as she looked to Whitebeard for permission. The man merely raised an eyebrow. I'd like to come on board too, just to treat him. I know the extent of his injuries, and I have a copy of his medical files. I can help. And she made eye contact with Marco. So can Marco. Fine, Shanks said stiffly. But just you two, no one else. Marco looked surprised, mimicking Bay's action as he silently looked to Oyaji for permission. When he gave a slight nod in assent, Marco followed Bay and Shanks onto the Red Force's ship. He easily matched Shanks' quick pace as they walked to the infirmary. Marco was not a fool. He knew that the Whitebeard pirates and the red-haired pirates did not have an alliance. He trusted Shanks enough that he wouldn't stab him or Bay in the back, but he didn't know about the other members. But right now they had a common goal: saving Ace's life, although he was still confused about the connection between the fire user and the Yonko. Hongo. Get in here. Quote. A lean man with dirty blonde hair peeked out from behind a curtain of a nearby bed, left eyebrow raised, which drew attention to the scar on his forehead. He stepped out fully, closing the curtains. I was already here, Shanks. Oh, shit. Shit is damn right. Put him over there, Hongo said, pointing at the nearest bed. And do you mind telling me why you thought it was a good idea to bring the 1st Division commander of the Whitebeard pirates here, along with one of their allied captains? The doctor washed his hands, pulling on gloves. They came on their own accord. Besides, they're doctors too, and since they spent some quality time with Ace, they know what the fuck happened to the kid. Shanks' tone made it clear that he was still pissed off, which, in Marco's opinion, he had every right to be. Turning his attention to the other two pirates, Hongo said, explain everything that happened to Ace while I treat him. Why should we? We don't know anything about you and your relationship with Ace, Marco responded. Shanks cut in. If I tell you, you guys will have to give us every detail and event that led up to Ace's current condition. Bay and Marco nodded in agreement. Well, it was way back then, Shanks said, when I met this kid named Luffy back in the East Blue. That was a few years ago, and it's also where I lost my arm. Luffy wanted to be on my crew so badly that he stabbed himself under his eye to prove that he wasn't afraid of getting hurt. Long story short, we became friends, really good friends, mind you. He even ate a devil fruit, one that made him stretch like rubber. Shanks smiled fondly, then continued. Then this bandit kidnaps Luffy because Luffy was being, well, Luffy. He thought that the bandit dishonored me, and while me and the crew were gone, Luffy jumped at the chance to try to beat him up. Obviously he didn't succeed, and the bandit somehow got out to sea holding Luffy hostage. I managed to get there in time just as the Lord of the Coast finished eating the bandit and was about to eat Luffy. So I sacrificed my arm, betting on the new era. Unfortunately, we had to leave Dawn Island later on, but before the crew and I left, I gave him my straw hat. Fast forward a couple years, much to my surprise, rookie, Fire Fist, Ace comes barging into the cave that the crew and I were staying at. The kid walks in like nobody's business, introduces himself rather politely, and thanks us for saving his brother's life. Now, we were all very confused, but then Lucky Roo had the sense to ask the name of Ace's brother. When he said Luffy, well, Luffy was like an honorary crew member for all of us, like a son to me. And by extension, I suppose Ace is like a nephew to me. Marco frowned, confused. If Luffy's like a son to you, wouldn't Ace technically also be like a son to you? Quote. That's for Ace to tell you. Let's just say he's keeping a dangerous secret, and I know it, even if he didn't tell me. Whitebeard probably knows too, just by looking at him. Almost in an undertone, Shanks added, after all, they look very similar. Wait, Marco interrupted, going over the new information in his head. I thought Ace only had one brother. Shanks raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Ace does only have one brother, Luffy. No. Bay shook her head. His name's Sabo. Chief of Staff in the Revolutionary Army, you know, Monkey D. Dragon and all. But Sabo's dead, Shanks replied. Ace got a little drunk and spilled some things. Sabo was blown up by celestial dragons when he was 10. That's all I know. That doesn't make any sense. We literally saw Sabo a couple of days ago, the 1st Division commander said. But maybe, what if Sabo survived from getting blown up by celestial dragons? We did see that he had a pretty nasty burn scar on his head. I suppose that would make sense then. The stories match. Hongo nodded as he spoke. But now it's your turn, he said, stretching his fingers as he seemed to search for a needle. Now you know why we're close to Ace, so tell us what happened to him. Bay cleared her throat. A lot happened to him. A couple months back, Ace took a hit for one of our crew members, resulting in the unhealed wound on his back. Bay's finger twitched. I stitched him up, but he obviously tore the stitches trying to kill Oyaji. This particular time, he strained himself too much after he got knocked into the water. We don't know if he has excess water in his lungs or not. He ran away before any of us could treat him. Now Shanks looked slightly confused, Hongo's brow furrowing as he took out some of Ace's stitches. Why would he take a hit for that crew member if he's trying to kill your captain? That doesn't sound like something he would do. I don't know. He won't open up to us at all. Gee, I wonder why, murmured Shanks sarcastically. Hongo cleaned the wound, disinfecting it with alcohol. Why, exactly, was your captain careless enough to knock Ace into the sea? Quote. Marco tensed slightly, Bay frowning. We can't tell you. Hongo sighed. Fine. Anything else I should know about? Quote. Well, he's been trying to kill Oyaji and, well, it's obviously not going too well for him. He's been doing it since day one and every single time he lost. Bay hesitated, then continued. He's also been starving himself, we've only found out recently. It was his brother who told us. It's a miracle that his ribs aren't broken. I assume his elbow brace is from his fights with your captain. Hongo seemed to have finished replacing Ace's stitches, now going on to check the rest of the fire user's body. And he is eating enough now, right? Quote. Yes, he is. Thatch is making sure of that, Marco replied. Hongo nodded, seemingly pleased. Does anyone know what Ace's blood type is? Quote. Marco looked to Bay, who shrugged. I don't know. That question was supposed to be after, where were you born? But Ace walked out on that one. I wasn't the one who interrogated him, anyway. If I recall correctly, Ace said his blood type was F, said Marco. But if you didn't talk to him, who wrote down the information? All I know is that I brought Ace to the infirmary. Hongo sighed. I guess I'll just have to take his blood then, just to double check. He's lost too much already, it's a miracle he's still breathing. Also, I took a chest X-ray, and there's nothing to worry about, he's got no fluid in his airways. Great. Marco looked at his sandals, and couldn't help as if feel something was off. Why couldn't he remember what happened during Ace's checkup? Most of the time his memory was excellent. Brow furrowed, he attempted to remember, as he reached a small spark in his brain that slipped away as soon as he tried to grab it. That was strange, almost as something was blocking his memories. There was also another issue. Normally, Marines wouldn't let two Yonkos meet at the same point for so long, unless... Crash. Shit. Marco cursed, because of course they had to be ambushed at the moment. The Red Force listed dangerously to one side the result of a cannonball. Hongo had to grab Ace to keep him in place. Well, this past hour has been delightful, but it seems that we can't have peace, Shanks said, hand on the hilt of his sword. Hey, Birdie, I bet that I can take out more Marines than you. Marco's eye twitched. The doctor, Hongo, looked up. Go, take on the Marines. I've got a patient to save. Marco nodded and ran up on deck, Bay at his heels. As they arrived, they recognized the scene around them as a total and utter bloodbath. A vice admiral who Marco didn't remember the name of was fighting against Shank's crew, another vice admiral foolishly attempting to take on Whitebeard. As Marco watched, a fleet of Marine ships surrounded the two Yonkos ships. Marco growled low in his throat. Did the Marines seriously think that was going to be enough to take them out? They would have probably needed a buster call. He turned half-human half-avian form, running and leaping. An updraft of wind caught on his widespread wings, and he easily soared through the air. The 1st Division commander landed in the middle of one of the Marine ships, smirking slightly when the commanding officer panicked. He easily took down the mast with a single kick. Shanks battled the vice admiral, although it was quite clear that he was toying with him. The vice admiral's attacks grew sloppier and sloppier as he grew more and more aggravated, causing his moves to become clumsy. When it was obvious that he was aiming for Shanks anymore, just trying to destroy, the red-haired Yonko used the flat of his blade to push him into the sea before the vice admiral could accidentally harm any of his crew members. Whitey Bay drew her sword, getting into her battle stance as she took on 6 foolish Marines that chose to rush her. They ended up dead on the deck, blood splattering the wood, throats slashed. On the other side of the battlefield, Jozu and Vista each took down a warship with a well-placed punch and a flying sword slash. Whitebeard swatted the vice admiral away into the sea as well, having grown bored of his antics. The remainder of Whitebeard's commanders stormed the ships on their side, bringing them down with terrifying ease. Shank's crew mirrored their movements, although they used different methods of attacking. Marco couldn't help but think that Yasop and Izu would be great friends, both having precise, accurate sharpshooting skills. All in all, the fight was over quickly, the fleet of Marine warships now obliterated, the Marines decimated. It had been a rather boring fight, the only damage being the explosion on Shank's ship, but even that could be quickly patched. Marco sighed, walking back down to the infirmary. He would let Shanks deal with his problems. Wish it was, I wish it was, I wish it was a phase. Nothing you can do and there's nothing you can say. Running from the pain. I gotta get away. Minutes earlier. Hongo sighed, cursing, stupid Marines, under his breath. Clearly, he couldn't have any peace. He just wanted to save Ace's life. The doctor used a needle to withdraw blood from Ace's body, and tested it. Just as Marco had claimed, the Logia's blood type was, in fact, F. That was annoying. Blood type F was very rare, and only one person on the ship had that type, Shanks. He didn't have any spare blood bags that were that type of blood, so he supposed he had to wait for Shanks. Hongo knew that his captain would be happy to help Luffy's brother. Hongo flopped down in a chair next to his patient, and waited for the fight to be over. He itched to join the brawl raging above, but he had a job to do. Besides, if any Marines somehow got past his crew's defenses, no one would be able to defend the helpless patients, except him. True to his intuition, a single Marine made his way into the room, wielding a sword and yelling shit. Hongo threw a needle at him, and it embedded itself into the Marine's forehead. The Marine fell to the ground, dead, before he even made it 2 steps into the infirmary. Hongo knew he would have to clean up the mess later, but, oh well. The doctor heard someone running down the staircase and looked up to see Shanks burst into the room, almost tripping over the dead Marine's arm. He was presumably shaking after the Marine who had run away. "Ah," his captain said. "I see you had fun." "Not really," replied Hongo dryly. "Sit down, will you? I have to take some of your blood. Your blood type is F, and surprise, surprise, I don't have any more F blood bags, and Ace's blood type F. So sit down if you want to save his life." Shanks sat down, and Hongo inserted a needle into his vein and connected it to a bag attached to an IV drip, also hooking up another tube that transferred blood to it. He then used another tube to transfer the blood to Ace. Both pirates watched as Shanks' blood flowed into Ace's forearm. The devil fruit user began to stir, as he opened his eyes blearily. "Wah, appended." He croaked out, words slurred. Shanks grinned. "Ace. You're awake." Said pirate blinked slowly at Shanks. "I can see that." The ship shook again, and Ace looked up. Words clearer, he asked, "What's happening upstairs?" "Oh, just a fight." The red-haired Yonko settled himself back in a chair, although his eyes widened when Ace tried to get up. Hongo pushed Ace back down. "Don't do that. You'll strain yourself." Ace frowned up at the doctor. "But I want to help." "No," the doctor said firmly. "If you don't recall, you passed out from blood loss since you reopened the wound on your back during your expedition to the sea. I don't know how long you were in there, but I do know what the sea does to devil fruit users. Get some rest, you'll need it." His tone left no room for argument, and Ace slumped back down into the blankets of the bed. Ace had another nightmare. This time, it wasn't from that timeline, thank the gods, but from one almost as bad. He had arrived just in time to see Teach sink the blade of the dagger between Thatch's shoulders. Ace yelled for help, experiencing the familiar feeling of worthlessness and self-hatred. Then he turned to Teach, fists flaming, and socked the bastard in the face. Blackbeard fell to the ground, the devil fruit, splattered with blood, rolling out of his hand and his dagger falling to the floor with a clatter. Ace picked up the weapon, getting ready to kill Teach with the very weapon that he had murdered Thatch with. Teach cowered on the floor, pupils wide and dilated in fear. Then Marco appeared, pieced everything together, and assumed that Ace was the traitor. Haruta was close behind him, and Marco wordlessly punched Ace in the head, making him fall unconscious. When the Logia user woke up, he was in the brig, arms chained to the wall with crusted blood under his fingernails. Haruta was outside, and when he saw that Ace was awake he ran to get Oyaji. The old pirate sat before Ace, pain on his face and asking why Ace would betray his family. Ace wanted to open his mouth and say that it wasn't him, he would never, but no one listened to him. Not Oyaji. Not Marco. Not Izu. Not Haruta. Not Vista. Not Jozu. No one believed him. Then the torture began, punches and kicks, bullet wounds, and sword slashes. The world sunk into a blur, a mess of bruises and gaping wounds caused by Ace's own family. There was a lump in his throat, and tears were pricking at the corners of his eyes, threatening to spill. But what hurt the most were the words, the phrases said to him. Traitor. Why? Why would you do this? Quote. Thatch is dead because of you. I wish I never met you. I wish you were never born. This is all your fault. All your fault. Teach left us because of you. You caused this, you caused the deaths. Die. You are not my brother. You are not my friend. I don't know you. You betrayed us. Fuck you. Quote. Drop dead. I wish you a painful, miserable death, all alone. Asshole. Bastard. You are no son of mine. Ace wanted to just curl up into a ball and die. He wanted to tell them that he was sorry for being born and a monster like him should have never existed. But his wish wasn't granted, and eventually, when everything went black, Ace woke up again in another loop. It's not just a show, I need you to know. I'm trying to keep it real, sometimes it's complicated. This battle for gold is killing my soul. It's hard to be yourself when all you feel is jaded. Shanks went to talk to Whitebeard, presumably about Ace's condition. Marco and Bay had gone with him as well, leaving Hongo alone with his sleeping patient. Inside the privacy of Whitebeard's room, Shanks had stared hard at Whitebeard. The red-haired Yonko said, I'm giving you one last chance, don't mess this up. When Ace wakes up, he will go with you and your crew to the next island over. If he is truly happy, he will stay with you and your crew. If he is not, then he will be handed over and taken under the Red Force's care. Whitebeard, Bay and Marco had agreed to the statement, finding it reasonable. Sure, the Whitebeard pirates had been excited at the prospect of new siblings, but they didn't want to hold Ace against his will. Bay frowned. But what about the Spade pirates? Quote. Ace will decide what he wants to do, replied Shanks. With that, all they had to do was just wait for Ace to wake up. Sabo awoke to a dark, dingy cell, his arms chained to the wall and a dull pounding at the back of his head. Fook, he groaned, slamming his head against the stone wall behind him. This only increased his migraine. Koala's gonna murder me, he thought. And so will Dragon. The revolutionaries are not going to like the fact that I've been kidnapped and held in some creepy-ass cell. Also, where the fuck am I? Oh yeah, some weird guy with horrible fashion sense tried to kill me. Then I broke his nose or something. Then I got knocked over the head with a basket of apples. That's absolutely wonderful, also explains where the migraine came from. From the familiar rocking sensation, Sabo could tell that he was on a boat on the sea, but he didn't know where he was. Sabo huffed. Now all he had to do was wait, or maybe he could bust out of here. After all, he was fairly certain that his lockpicks hadn't been taken from him. The revolutionary stomped on the floor, and the faint metal rattling in his boots told him that his lockpicks were, indeed, just as he had left them. Bending as far as possible, Sabo picked up the lockpick with his mouth and proceeded to grab it with his hand. After checking to make sure no one was around, Sabo fiddled with the lock. Eventually, he heard the familiar, satisfying click, and one cuff fell to the ground with a loud clatter. His other hand free, he was about to use the lockpick on the other cuff when he heard footsteps. Sabo quickly pressed his hand to the lock, hoping that the cell was dark enough so his kidnapper wouldn't be able to see that his hand was free. A man with a large, lumpy nose and unshaven face poked his head through the bars of the cell. In Sabo's personal opinion, his kidnapper looked as if he were on the verge of death, his sickly pale skin somehow shining in the faint light. The revolutionary decided that he resembled the Grim Reaper. That was strange. The man then spoke. "Oh, good, you're up. My name is Doc Q, or better known as, Death God." Sabo repressed a snicker. The name was very fitting. Doc Q abruptly coughed loudly, blood dribbling down his chin as flecks of the red liquid flew onto Sabo's face. The revolutionary resisted the overwhelming urge to wipe off the blood and drop-kick the man into the ocean. "Pardon," Doc Q said lightly. "But the boss changed his mind and wanted you alive. Enjoy your stay here." When Sabo's kidnapper didn't receive a response, he took the silence as Sabo's fear, when in reality Sabo was plotting the different ways he could kill the man. "I'll hand you over to the Marines," Doc Q continued. "On orders, so don't take any offense. After all, we could fetch a high price for someone related to the Pirate King's son." Sabo's heart all but stopped in his chest, but he smiled. "That's ridiculous. Everyone knows that the Pirate King died ages ago. There's no way that he has a child. Are you sure about that?" Doc Q grinned, a hint of manic light entering his eyes. "Well then, here's a name that might sound familiar. His name's Portgas D. Ace." Sabo sucked in a breath. "And," Doc Q continued, "he is the Pirate King's son. So stop playing games, you piece of shit." Sabo knew that he was definitely in trouble now and he was scared. But no, he wasn't scared for himself and his safety, he was scared for Ace, because how the fuck had they found out? Ace awoke again, not feeling well rested at all. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought he'd reset again, but then he looked over and saw a unfamiliar face staring at him. Names drifted past in his head, people's countenances blurring together. That was another unfortunate effect of time traveling. He tended to forget where he was and who people were. The man was saying something. Oh right, his name was Harper. No, that wasn't right. Ace knew that it started with an H. The man snapped a finger in front of his face, drawing Ace's attention. The fire user looked at him, slightly confused and disoriented. When the man saw that he had Ace's attention, he sighed. "As I was saying," he continued, "now that you're awake, you'll be sent back to the Whitebeard pirates. At the next island over, you'll decide what you want to do. You can leave them, or stay, or come with us. You also need to figure out what happens to your crew." Ace opened his mouth and closed it again, resembling a fish out of water. How the hell had Shanks managed this? Well, at least he thought that Shanks was responsible. His current predicament, the decisions he'd have to make, that meant that he could, essentially, do whatever the hell he wanted at the next island. The pyromaniac could only nod his head, and he managed a "thank you." Confirming his suspicions, the doctor, Hongo, said, "It's not me you should thank. It's Shanks." He somehow convinced their stubborn asses to agree to this. Ace mustered a weak grin. "How long until the next island?" Quote, "It's about a month, give or take," replied Hongo. Ace just nodded, mind churning with thoughts. If he remembered correctly, Teach betrayed Thatch around a week before Luffy set sail, or maybe it was halfway through April. Anyways, Thatch's murder was between those two times. "What's today's date?" Ace asked. "Oh, I think it's the 22nd, February 22nd. Why? That anxious to leave the Whitebeard pirates already?" Hongo raised an eyebrow jokingly. Quite the opposite, thought Ace, but he kept his musings to himself. "That's around a month-long gap. But there will most likely be storms that will slow the Moby's progress, so maybe the times will fit." And Ace dared to hope that maybe there was the slimmest of chances that he would possibly be able to save them this time. After all, he'd experienced the worst possible timelines already. Surely there couldn't be anything worse in store, right? Hongo smiled, his voice breaking Ace out of his thoughts. "Come on, the rest of the crew is desperate to see you again." "Ah," Ace thought, slightly relieved. "Well, now I know that I'm on good terms with them, I think." The devil fruit user shifted out of bed and followed Hongo to the mess hall where the red-haired pirates were gathered. The first to greet him was Usopp, who grinned and slung an arm over Ace's shoulder. Lucky Roo waved over Ace, offering him some food laid out on the table. Ace readily agreed. Now he could eat as much as he wanted without having to worry about the Whitebeard pirates. He was definitely going to take advantage of this. As he ate, crew members walked by, giving him their regards. Ace simply said hello, either unable to remember their names or just not recognizing them altogether. Hongo sat next to Ace, keeping a watchful eye on him, especially after someone tried to clap the fire user in the back. Eventually, when Ace was almost finished with his food, Ben strolled by and gave his greetings. The first mate of the red-haired pirates gave him a reassuring smile and walked away, and Ace didn't know why. The fact infuriated him slightly, but he made sure to keep his temper in check. After all, he didn't want to cause conflict with the one pirate crew that seemed to be on his side. Ace set down his fork, sighing in contentment as he leaned back in his chair, flexing his fingers. He looked up when a shadow fell over him, and his vision was almost entirely obscured with a vivid red. "Hey, Ace, walk with me." Shanks looked hopefully at Ace, who nodded. The two walked towards the starboard side of the ship, away from the Moby Dick and rambunctious crew members. Shanks must have told Hongo to stay back, since the doctor hadn't followed the pair. Ace was more thankful than Shanks could probably imagine. He had needed a way to get away from the noise. Facing the water, Shanks handed Ace a white Den Den Mushi. Ace looked at Shanks, confused. "It's an untraceable Den Den," explained Shanks. "Also, here." The Yonko handed Ace 3 small sheets of paper, 2 with numbers on it. "These are the numbers for the Red Force and Makino's bar," explained Shanks. "So if you ever feel like the Whitebeard pirates are mistreating you, just give us a call, and we'll come pick you up." Ace tried to manage a thank you, but the words somehow got stuck in his throat along the way. Unable to construct a proper sentence, the fire user hugged Shanks tightly. Shanks smiled, hugging Ace as he patted his shoulder, messing with Ace's hair slightly. Oi. Ace broke away from the hug, eye twitching. I'm not a kid. Quote. Hey, Firefly, you'll always be a child in our eyes. Needless to say, Ben had to deal with the scorched deck of the ship, Firefly, attempting to do Shanks in before anyone else could. Ooh. The rest of the day passed by in a blur. Ace was ushered back to the Moby Dick and the red-haired pirates departed. Ace clutched the den and the numbers in his hand, eternally grateful for the gift. Just a few more weeks, Ace thought. A few more weeks and I'll be out of here. A few more weeks before Teach tries to kill Thatch. Save Thatch and get out of their lives. Simple. Easy peasy. Feeling drained of all energy, Ace flopped down onto the bed in his borrowed room, unaware that he had accidentally left some notes out. Very important notes. Chapter 18. Thatch contemplates his life's choices and Ace is insane as usual. Wakey wakey. Thatch kicked open the door and barged into their resident fire user's room, flippantly dismissing the rule of personal space. Personal space was overrated anyway. No one really needed it. In an effort to convince Ace to stop trying to kill Oyaji, Thatch had whipped up some of the most delectable items in the Four Blues. If this didn't convince Ace to just join already, Thatch didn't know what would. Currently, he was precariously balancing 6 different platters using both his hands and his head, a move that he had done so often that the dishes falling weren't a danger anymore. Thatch frowned slightly, spirited mood dimming just slightly as he saw that Ace was still sleeping. For once, there was no scowl or sneer on the youth's face, he looked almost peaceful. The freckles speckling his cheeks made him appear eternally youthful, dare say Thatch thought he looked almost adorable. Now, if only Thatch could get his hands on a den that could take pictures. Then his blackmail would be set for life. Looking for a place to put down the platters of food, Thatch turned his head side to side. He spotted a sleeping den in the corner of Ace's desk and made a mental note to get lettuce to feed the snails later. A desk. Bingo. Thatch walked over, easily crossing the room in 2 steps. He cleared away the papers. Why did the fire user have papers? And set down the dishes. Maybe Ace liked writing or drawing. There were many things that the crew didn't know about their soon-to-be youngest brother. Thatch set the trays down and let out a curse when he knocked over a couple of sheets of paper. Fuck. He knew that Ace really wouldn't appreciate him messing around with his stuff, but wouldn't it be better for him to pick it up? He bent down, picking up the documents, and stacked the papers neatly by the food. His eyes wandered over the words written in a neat scrawl on the first page. The 4th Division commander frowned a bit. What was this bit about time travel and looping? Maybe the kid was into supernatural stuff like this. Well, he wouldn't judge. He smiled. Slightly amused, Thatch turned over the paper, but his smile quickly disappeared just as soon as it had appeared. For one, it had the names of some of the commanders listed including his. He tried to make out the words within circled paragraphs, arrows, and lines. Wah, Thatch squinted, rubbing his eyes. Come Lou's birthday, he will betray the Whitebeard pirates. Or maybe somewhere between April and May. Thatch covered his mouth, legs shaking slightly as he read the next few lines. Thatch will die. Prevent his death, take the fruit first. Before he can. If I take it, what will happen? If they finally let me go, it would be all for the better, but I don't want to. I can't. Fuck. He will betray them and I will die. Will this work? Am I just wasting my time? I don't want them to hate me. It had been written in jagged, scratchy lines, almost desperately, then crossed out. The paper was slightly ripped, possibly from the pressure of Ace's writing utensil, and was that splotches of blood. Well, fuck. Thatch gulped and set the papers down with trembling hands, and hightailed the hell out of the room, mind spinning. Was Ace okay in the head? Did he perhaps have a couple screws loose up there? Something didn't sit right with the chef. He tried to ignore the churning in his stomach, but to no avail. His palms were sweaty, his knees weak. Ace's notes spoke of betrayal. Ace's notes spoke of death, his death. Ace's notes spoke of his insecurity around the crew. Thatch made it to his room and plopped himself down on the bed, the door swinging shut. He couldn't help but feel as if he had done something horribly wrong. He had quite possibly read his soon-to-be brother's most private thoughts, his deepest secrets. And what was the bit about time travel? What was the part that foreshadowed his death? Surely he could trust his brothers over an essentially complete stranger who had acted like nothing but an asshole to them and his family. But still, there was the flicker of pain in Ace's eyes, the way he almost purposefully tried to push away the crew whenever they approached. And if Ace was right and Thatch desperately hoped otherwise, who was the traitor? What did the fire user mean by the fruit? He felt nauseous, sick to his stomach. The cook pressed his palms into his eyes, Ace's messy handwriting embedded, burned into his mind. Thatch knew he would not forget about it anytime soon, and quite possibly never. Thatch will die. When Ace woke up, the first thing that hit him was the enticing aroma of different cuisines. He blinked twice, trying to rub the heaviness out of his eyes, his warm bed luring him back to sleep. Before the red-haired pirates had departed earlier, Ace had been looking around in Hongo's cabinets for a special type of medicine, Afrixian. It was made from a specific type of flower that grew only in the South Blue, which made it very rare and even harder to obtain. But Afrixian had certain qualities, including the fact that it granted the user a blissful, dreamless sleep, which was why it was so sought after. Thankfully, Ace was able to get some after much begging and bribing on his part, so he would be able to have no more nightmares. Finally, some slight reprieve. He had learned about the medicine from a past Lupin, although he had never actually been able to acquire some before now. He'd heard a first-hand account of someone who had taken Afrixian. The benefits were true to their word. Ace sighed, forcing himself to get up as he stumbled over to the desk where the food sat. Obviously he had to eat. Sabo and Shanks had both threatened him, but he seriously didn't want to accept the food. He could have just done fine with bread and cheese. His stomach growled viciously, sounding suspiciously like the hungry animals back on Dawn Island, not like Ace remembered what they sounded like. But Ace was still only human, no matter his immortality, and he eventually succumbed to the feeling. He gobbled down the food and grudgingly admitted to himself that Thatch had cooked his ass off this time. His eyes glanced around the table, and he spotted some misplaced papers that had been moved, perhaps to make room for the food. A cold chill ran down Ace's back, and he cursed himself for being so careless. Those were his notes, weren't they? Ace prayed, closing his eyes as he resisted the strong, tempting urge to scream. When he opened his eyes again, the papers still sat there innocently. He tried to look on the bright side. Maybe the person who had brought the food in, presumably Thatch, hadn't looked at the papers. Or if they did, they would just assume that he was mentally deranged, or maybe even joking, hopefully. Yeah, right. Ace should really stop lying to himself. Nothing was fine. And now they all probably knew, and oh, joy, they all saw the cracks widening, blood dripping out of the wounds, and all his fears and nightmares were hung up for everyone to see. His mind was singing the familiar tune of insanity, and Ace began hyperventilating. He couldn't breathe, the room was too small, suffocating, even, and it was just like he was drowning all over again. The walls closed in on him, crushing him, and his ribs were creaking and his bones were threatening to break under the pressure. Liquid terror was somehow injected in his brain, and suddenly Ace felt very, very, impossibly small. In the midst of it all, Ace knew, he felt the overwhelming sensation of something being very, very wrong and out of place. But he didn't know the cause, there was no cause to be found. Oh, Ace realized belatedly. I'm having a panic attack. There was a rule, the 3-3-3 rule. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, oh wait, that can't possibly be right. What was the rule? Name 3 objects, name 3 sounds. Ace sunk his fingers into his forearms, trying to clear his mind and regulate his breathing. 3 objects. 3 sounds. 3 body parts. Ground yourself to reality. Nothing is wrong. I can see Thatch's food, I can see the bed, I can see the walls that are not moving. I can hear Pop's laughter, Marco's voice, and the crashing of the sea onto the sides of the Moby. I have body parts, to my hands, my arms, my legs. Calm. Ace forced a shaky breath out and loosened his grip on his forearms. His heart still raced like a jackrabbit, but he sewed back the pieces of himself into a singular, unmovable object. Excellent. Panic attacks were a fan-fucking-tastic way to start a very long and grueling day. I probably should plan my day out, Ace thought. First, attack Pop's Whitebeard, annoy the living shit out of the crew members. Ooh, I can make this into a game. 5 points if someone snaps at you, 10 points if it's a commander, and if the captain gets annoyed, I win the game. The aim is 50 points a day. Although, if I want to set the bar higher, I can go for 100. It's not like I have anything better to do. Bonus points for getting Marco and Thatch to punch me in the face, although it's unlikely. With what Shanks said, they're all gonna fucking baby me. After lunch, more assassination attempts. Then just sit in my room and do absolutely nothing. Maybe I could try maladaptive daydreaming, if you even force yourself to do it. I don't know shit about it. Damn, I really need a hobby besides dying. I'm good at drawing, but it's not likely that I will be able to draw anything else other than bloody corpses, Marineford, and deaths. Maybe I can try drawing Luffy's face. His scar has 2 stitches and it's under his left eye, can't forget the straw hat, either. With that thought in his mind, Ace went to find a handy weapon. My friends don't walk, they run. Skinny dip in rabbit holes for fun. Popping balloons with guns. Getting high off helium. Vista was annoyed. After Ace's latest assassination attempt, the kid had gone back to his room, but not before flashing an incorrigible smirk at Haruta and Vista. The two had just been near the railing, admittedly intoxicated, but it wasn't like they had done anything wrong. Haruta seemed to feel the same as him. I am so done with this kid, he growled. Prancing around, thinking he owns this ship. Vista nodded in agreement. It's time we knocked him off his high horse and put him in his damn place, Haruta continued, half slurring. I'm not gonna stand around and take shit from this kid. She, instead of shit. Why the fuck does Pops even want him anyway? Vista inquired. He's nothing special. He probably thinks that he's something just because an emperor noticed him, but in reality, he waved his hand, too drunk to finish his train of thought. Haruta snorted. Say, how about we prank him? Quote. Vista raised an eyebrow, intrigued. After Haruta and Vista were less drunk, which happened to be a couple hours later, the two went through with their plan. Vista did feel guilty, but not enough to back out. Maybe it was just because he hadn't really done any pranks in a long time, especially after that incident with Marco. Besides, if he did back out, he would receive endless teasing from Haruta for being too chicken, and a coward for not being able to stomach pranking Fire Fist Ace. What was the worst the kid could do anyway? Give him a surface burn. That was quite possibly the worst damage he could possibly inflict. The alternative was Haruta. Well, he didn't want to think about it. He'd never be able to live down all the horrifying titles Haruta would be able to place on his back. So no, it wasn't like he was blackmailed into doing this, per se. No, it was just avoiding potential blackmail. Not like Haruta already had the goods on everyone in the crew. It wasn't even that big of a prank anyway. Thatch had already accidentally pulled one on Ace, even if it was meant for Marco, the incident with the water bucket. So it was no big deal, right? Wrong. He was dead wrong. 000. The two commanders had executed their plan perfectly, wiring a can of red paint that they had found lying around over Ace's door. The moment the brat would step out, the can's contents would be emptied over his head. Haruta had insisted on hiding around the corner with a den camera. They were in the perfect position to see Ace's reaction. Any minute now, muttered Haruta. Vista tapped his foot impatiently. Right on cue, Ace opened the door, rubbing his eyes. Their contraption worked perfectly. As soon as the hinges of the door reached 45 degrees, the can of paint flipped over. The fire user yelped, leaping backwards, but not fast enough. The paint hit him directly, splattering all over his front, although the majority of it was on his cowboy hat. Haruta absolutely cackled, snapping a picture of the kid dripping in paint. Ace blinked, expression of fury replaced by sudden, eerie calm. His mouth was slightly parted, as if he were screaming, but no sound escaped. If it weren't for the fire user's chest, still rising and falling, Vista could have assumed that Ace was some sort of red-painted statue. Then his breathing steadily grew faster, almost as if he were hyperventilating, but that couldn't be right. Paint couldn't do that to someone, right? But what bothered him the most was the look in Ace's eyes, the overwhelming fear, the sheer terror. Haruta didn't seem to notice, since he placed his hands on his hips and simply said, "Stop being such a big baby, it's just a bit of red paint." "Haruta," Vista said, stepping closer to the other, "stop." Haruta turned around, frowning. "What do you mean, stop? You can't order me around like one of the people in your division. He deserves it, Vista." Quote. "Look at the kid," Vista lowered his voice slightly, "he's hyperventilating. I'm no doctor, but that's PTSD or some shit right there. We shouldn't have done this." Vista exhaled. What we did was wrong." Haruta opened his mouth, probably about to deliver some smart retort, but Ace muttered under his breath, "I have to get the blood off." "Wah?" Haruta stared at Ace, confused. "What blood?" Quote. The red paint had already dried and was starting to flake. Ace stared at his hands and scratched himself, scratching hard enough to draw blood. Ace took a step back, then another and another, until he was sitting against the wall of his room. He had stumbled over his steps and was now just sitting there, arms hugging himself in a pale imitation of a hug. Before the commander's eyes, Ace grabbed his head, scratching at his scalp, practically tearing out locks of his black hair. His movements grew increasingly erratic as he frantically scratched himself, as if trying to get something out. "Hey," Vista started, stepping forward. Haruta looked slightly concerned, although he was still unsure of what was happening. A single tear leaked out of Ace's eye, the droplet rolling down the side of his face. It hit his hand, although the fire user didn't seem to notice. Ace's arms went slack, as he slumped down, looking as though all the energy had been drained out of his body. And Vista knew that it was completely fucked up. The swordsman frowned, approaching the fire user, who didn't seem to register the other's presence. Instead, he seemed to fold in on himself, resting his head in his arms. His eyes were dull and blank as if he had simply given up. Vista placed a hand on Ace's shoulder. It was meant to be a comforting gesture, for whatever the kid was experiencing, but instead of relaxing, Ace flinched. If possible, he folded in on himself even more, making himself as small as possible. No, Vista thought, making himself a smaller target. He thinks I'll hurt him, doesn't he? Stop it, Ace murmured, softly. Vista blinked, confused. I'm sorry, Ace said, barely higher than a whisper. Please don't hurt me. Vista's heart twisted and clenched painfully as he heard those words. Listen, kid, I don't know what you mean. I'm not gonna hurt you, and neither is Haruta. It was just a prank. He raised his hands as a placating gesture, trying to show Ace that he wasn't going to harm him. There was no response. Listen, maybe we should just get Bae down here or something, Haruta said. Although he tried to act nonchalant, it was clear that he had an ounce of worry to spare for Ace. Hey, kid, are you okay? Vista didn't touch Ace this time, but remained at a respectful distance, giving Ace his space. That seemed to snap Ace out of it. The kid looked up, gray orbs widening in confusion. Wah, Ace frowned, blinking. Disassociation. Vista thought, before pushing it away. I said, hey kid, are you okay? Vista asked again, repeating his earlier question. Vista watched with mild concern and slight interest as a variety of emotions flashed through Ace's face, ranging from confusion, to fear, to anger, back to fear, some unnamed emotion, then settling on anger. I'm not a kid, he said, eyes shadowed by his hat that was still dripping with paint. Even though Ace's eyes were shadowed, Vista could still sense the death glare directed at him and Haruta. However, he couldn't stop the part of his brain that was thinking. Fuck. What if that hat had been special to Ace? What if he and Haruta had unknowingly destroyed one of Ace's most precious items? The top hat he wore wasn't any special decoration, it was the last thing his father had gifted him before he had been ruthlessly murdered by his so-called best friend. How would I feel if someone destroyed my hat? Ace glared at them, crossing his arms. Are you two just gonna stand there and keep on staring at me like a pair of fucking creeps? Quote. Exclamation mark. Vista spluttered, very confused and taken aback. Geez, this kid really could flip his moods like the toss of a coin. Let's just go, Vista, Haruta sneered. Obviously, Ace here doesn't want to associate with us commanders. Yeah, I don't, Ace says. So you guys can take your damn invitation to this crew and shove it where the sun doesn't fucking shine. Vista blinked. Haruta's eye twitched, the shorter commander visibly irritated by the pyromaniac's smartass comments. Ace stood up, straightening to his back. Although he was a couple inches shorter than Vista, he still looked intimidating. The swordsman figured that it was something in the other's eyes, the slightest tinge of madness there, or maybe it was the slight twitch at the corner of Ace's lips. Vista got the unpleasant feeling that Ace was trying to suppress a smile, not a ha-ha very funny one, but something much darker. Flipping them the bird, Ace slammed the door shut. "Wow," remarked Haruta rather sarcastically. "Temper much." The commander had regained his unflappable demeanor within a second. Vista put his head in his hands. He felt sick. Behind the door, Ace crouched, head between his knees as he slumped downwards. He was tired. And, as he helpfully noted before, he did not appreciate that little prank of Haruta's. Ace was almost certain that it had been Haruta's idea, but there was always a slim chance. Ace shuddered, recalling the events. Taking his hat off his head, he stared at it mournfully. He wasn't really seeing the red paint that covered half of his hat though, he was seeing something different. It wasn't paint. It was blood. Judging from the smell, Haruta and Vista had used washable paint, thank whatever gods that were still on his side. Sighing, Ace stood up, he'd better get himself cleaned up. He seriously did not want to venture outside, seeing as the puddle of red paint outside of his door served as a minor inconvenience. Peering up at the ceiling, Ace spotted a vent. He hoisted himself upwards and began the slow, tedious process of climbing through the system without making a single noise. Eventually, he reached a relatively unused bathroom on the second deck, port side. After making sure that it was unoccupied, Ace slipped out of the vent and landed with a rather loud thump on the floor. Wincing, Ace got up, rubbing his head. After he locked the door, he began scrubbing the paint off his front half and his hat. Soon, he managed to get most of it off, although it left a faint red mark. Ace groaned. He really needed to get new clothes on the next island. He crawled back through the vents, arriving in his room and dropping on the floor, although this time with more grace. He got to his feet, blinking blearily at the red paint near the door and some splattered bits on the walls. At the moment, he couldn't bring himself to care. He dragged himself to the bed and plopped down on his back, putting the pillow over his face. He wrapped his arms around the pillow. He screamed. When Ace was done screaming, he rolled over, still pressing his face into his pillow, just existing. He was so done. Although screaming had released a bit of his stress. At this point, Ace was pretty positive that he was going to get white hairs before he was 40, it was a miracle that he hadn't gotten them already. Assuming he lived to 40, which had never happened. Ha ha. Very funny. He knew how to lie, but he didn't know how to cope. But he was getting sick and tired of lying, too. So what did he want? He didn't know anymore. He wanted to save his family, but what did he want for himself? Questions and no answers. Ace rolled back over again, staring at the ceiling. Mind reeling and chest heaving, Ace felt himself get lost in the grainy wooden boards, the different patterns and textures, and the lines here and there where they were cut unevenly. There was a knock on the door and Bay came in, followed by Marco. Startled out of his stupor, Ace shot up as he cursed under his breath. Pasting a glare on his face, Ace scowled at the other two people in the room, attempting to convey the message that their presence was unwelcome. It seemed that someone Vista, maybe, had reported his little breakdown before to his caretakers. Well, that was absolutely fantastic. We paint white roses red. Each shade from a different person's head. This dream is a killer. Getting drunk with a blue caterpillar. They were in the infirmary. Ace, Marco, Bay, Haruta, and Vista all sat in a circle, Ace against his will. It seemed that Haruta shared the same sentiment as he did. Well, Ace thought sarcastically, that's one thing we agree on. So what, exactly, am I doing here? Ace asked, acting bored as he played with his thumbs. Marco shot him a look. Don't play stupid with me, Ace, he said. Aw, shucks, Ace replied, feigning ignorance. Marco turned to Haruta and Vista. The Phoenix just looked done. You played a prank on Ace, Marco said, which caused a panic attack. Ace opened his mouth to protest, to say that he didn't have a panic attack, and he was perfectly sane, thank you very much, but before he could speak Marco glared at him. Don't talk, the 1st Division commander said. Now, I don't know what the hell is going on, but I do know one thing for sure, Haruta and Vista both pulled a prank on you, correct? Ace simply glared at the other. His words seemed to be failing him spectacularly today. I'll take that as a yes, Marco said. Turning to Haruta and Vista, he asked, and what, exactly, prompted you to do this? It was just a prank, Marco, Haruta said. No big deal. It is a big deal, they reprimanded, when it causes a panic attack. Marco looked over at Bay and Ace. Ace avoided looking at the other. We aren't mad. You didn't know. We don't blame you. But we are gathered here because we need to know why the red paint triggered a panic attack. At some point, Ace was acutely aware of everyone's eyes on him. He just blinked. Ace, Bay prompted. Oh, yeah, Ace said. So, the deal here is that it's none of your business. I did not have a panic attack. Ace bit his tongue from saying that he had experienced one already, before the prank even occurred. The second one, during the paint incident, had mainly just been flashbacks of rather unpleasant memories that he would have chosen not to relive. Sure, Marco said skeptically. He looked over at Vista. Vista, is there anything you would like to contribute? After all, you were the one who reported this incident, Marco said, looking over at the swordsman. He was saying things, Vista said. Like he was scared. Really scared. I believe he referred to the red paint as blood. Ace bit the inside of his cheek. Thanks a lot, Vista, he thought. You just made my fucking day. I, for one, Ace said, raising his hand, would like to argue that I did not say those things. Put your hand down, Marco snapped. This isn't school. Haruta, you were there. What happened? Quote. What Vista said, Haruta seconded. Betrayed by my own family, not family, Ace mused detachedly. Fan-fucking-tastic. Do you have anything to say about this, Ace? Bay asked. Ace noted that she was speaking in her soft voice, one that she used to refer to fragile patients, as if she were afraid that he might shatter under yelling or pressure. Ace twitched. I'm not fragile, he thought. Oh, just some PTSD and some shit, Ace said. The lies came easily, well practiced through years and years. I especially had a fun time witnessing the murder of my entire family. At least that bit was true. Ace smiled rather nonchalantly. The rest of the people in the room looked horrified. Whoops. Ace suppressed a giggle. Was he not supposed to say that? Well, they did ask him for the truth. Ignoring the twinge of pain bubbling in his chest, Ace took some sort of savage pleasure in their mortified expressions. Ace, Bay started, I am so sorry. Don't be, Ace replied, smiling, keeping his expression neutral. It was my fault, after all, not yours, he thought. As the others in the room kept gawking at him, Ace felt his forced smile turn a bit sour. Why did they keep staring at him? He hadn't said anything wrong. "Aw, shit. I mean my dad died before I was born and my mom died after childbirth. Oh, and they murdered every woman and child on the island, Baterilla, because it was rumored that the Pirate King's son was there. That's besides the point, though." Ace paused, cursing himself internally. He'd really made this worse, hadn't he, if the others' alarmed faces were anything to go by. The dead silence in the room was disrupted by Vista, who started with, "Ace. Act like everything is fine," Ace instructed himself. "You are a perfectly stable person who would rather not experience a third panic attack within a single day." "Yay?" Ace asked. Marco face-palmed, Bay ran a hand over her eyes, and Haruta's jaw went slack. I think I'm gonna go," Ace said, pasting a shit-eating grin on his face. He moved towards the door, and no one tried to stop him. Ace blinked. They really were going to let him go that easily. Fine by him. He opened the door and walked out, unintentionally slamming it. Ace winced, then walked away, brooding in his dark thoughts. "So, that went well," Marco said. One of Bay's eye twitched. "I swear," she groaned, "that kid has some kind of personality disorder. One moment he's dropping the most heartbreaking life story known to man, and the next he acts like nothing happened. Then he has the nerve to act like an insufferable." Bay paused, looking for a pillow. When she found one, she put her head into it and screamed. Haruta nodded. "I feel your pain. I have some duties to attend to," Vista said, edging towards the door. "My work here is finished." Haruta got up and sprang after Vista, and both of them left the room. Marco looked at Bay, who was still hiding her face in the pillow. "So, the 1st Division commander started, what are we going to do now?" Quote, "I don't even know anymore," Bay mumbled. "Doesn't it break your heart?" Quote. Marco blinked. An 18-year-old kid, he's only 18, Marco, he shouldn't have to experience something like this. Bay buried her face even deeper into the pillow. "He's so sad, but then he just switches it up to being happy. And he's real good at it, too, but I've been a doctor for many years." Bay looked up, staring at Marco. "He's real good, but he can't fool me. I know someone who needs care when I see them. And when they try hiding it," Bay gestured helplessly in the air. "It breaks your heart," Marco finished, repeating Bay's earlier statement. He dragged a hand down his face. "Fuck," he muttered, talking to himself. "What are we going to do?" Quote. "I don't know," Bay replied. "For once I'm stumped. Befuddled. Flabbergasted. Take your pick." "We've got to help him somehow," Marco said. "We've still got until the next island. We've got to convince Ace to stay with us." Marco paused. "We'll set the ship as slow as possible, we've got a plentiful supply of food. Cut the Moby's speed in half and we'll reach the next island in May." Bay nodded slowly. Marco continued, "If we still haven't got enough provisions, I could always fly out and get us some more." Bay snorted. "You can't carry a lot by yourself. Maybe send out a backup ship instead." Marco rolled his eyes and nodded. "I'm not a good therapist," he finally confessed, breaking the awkward silence they had fallen into. "And I may not know how to help Ace, but I do know that I want to." "But how are we supposed to help him if he doesn't tell us anything?" Exclamation mark. This is so frustrating." "Tell me about it," Bay snorted. "I think I need a drink." "Of course you would say that," Marco muttered dryly. Something tugged at the back of his mind, fluttering insistently, but Marco ignored it. He looked up, looking at Bay as he opened his mouth to say something. He closed it though as his vision doubled, and Marco got an extremely odd sense of déjà vu. Almost. No, Marco was certain this had happened before. He snorted at himself, laughing quietly. As if it was literally impossible. Sure, he'd gotten this sense before, but it was so damn ridiculous. Marco pushed the thought away as he accompanied Bay to the kitchens to get a nice, long drink. Maybe it would help clear his mind. I'm peeling the skin off my face. 'Cause I really hate being safe. The normals, they make me afraid. The crazies, they make me feel sane. The days bled into weeks, and before Ace knew it, a month had passed. An entire month of faking it, getting his family to hate him, and trying to assassinate his not father. A month of torture and pain that only seemed to worsen with each passing hour. And Ace couldn't wait for it to be over. He was quite sure that half of the commanders know, at least 3/4 of them and the crew were at their rope's end with him. He had yet to see Teach's face appear, but Ace suppressed that thought, confining it to the back of his mind. The scars from the fights that came through the years were simply invisible, no one could see them. Although his wounds had healed, his mental scars would never. Ace shook his head, slightly relaxed in the privacy of his room. His hair, matted with blood and greasy, stuck to his face. Ace winced slightly, desiring nothing more at the moment than to go and take a damn shower. But acting like an asshole would mean refusing hospitality from the Whitebeard pirates, and sadly, hospitality meant showers. He couldn't exactly jump in the sea and call it a day, either, for obvious reasons. Ace supposed he would have to wait until the next rain or until a late hour where the bathrooms weren't occupied. Right on cue, Thatch, no not Thatch, Haruta, opened the door. He wrinkled his nose at Ace, and said, "Please go take a bath. I've got your food right here." The commander didn't try to hide his obvious distaste, and even though Ace didn't smell bad, thanks to his devil fruit, a fine layer of grime covered him from head to toe. Forcing his mouth into a sneer with perfect, practiced ease, Ace snarled, "Why the fuck should I?" Quote. Because, Haruta hesitated, and apparently unable to think of a reason, he said, "Because we want you to. Look, I'll even throw in an extra plate of food. Hey. I've got a better deal, how about fuck off and don't come back?" Quote. "No can do," replied the commander with equal sass. The two glared daggers at each other, when suddenly Thatch came bursting into the room, almost running Haruta over. "Ace," he said, "I've been meaning to come over." Quote. Haruta glared at Thatch and left the room, slamming the door behind him. Thatch looked worriedly behind him, and asked, "Haruta's not giving you a hard time, is he?" Quote. Acting affronted, Ace replied, "And why the hell would you care?" He sneered at the commander. "It's not like you and your precious pops have ever actually done so, you've just pretended to. At least Haruta doesn't sugarcoat the truth." Thatch looked at Ace, hurt briefly flashing in his eyes. "Ace," the cook said slowly, "we do care about you. We want you to become a part of our family." Ace scoffed. "Yeah, right." Getting up, he walked over to the door that had been previously slammed shut and said, "Listen, I appreciate you coming to visit and all, but I genuinely don't care. Please see yourself out." Ace yanked open the door and gestured to it, making insulting hand motions as he did so. "Ace," Thatch began, but said person didn't let him finish the sentence. "Don't, Ace, me," snapped the fire user. "I know what you people really want," and Ace ignored the painful twinge in his chest, "you're all just lying to my face." So please, Thatch, just go. Thatch finally got up and left. Ace slammed the door shut behind him, but not before Thatch said, "Ace, we aren't lying. We do want you to join us." Ace grit his teeth, grinding them together as he heard Thatch left. It took most of his self-restraint to not run after him, screaming that he was sorry, so sorry, and that he wanted to join the crew but he couldn't, and so much more that he couldn't quite put into words. But Ace didn't. Thatch walked away. Ace didn't. He clenched his hands, balling them into a fist, nails piercing the palm of his hand. It drew blood. "I'm nuts, baby, I'm mad. The craziest friend that you've ever had. You think I'm psycho, you think I'm gone. Tell the psychiatrist something is wrong." Ignoring the churning in his stomach, Sabo stared blankly at the spot where Doc Q had just left. Numbly, he forced himself to move, carefully picking the other lock. It fell off with a resounding thud. Sabo was free. Contemplating his next actions, Sabo figured he could easily break free from the prison. Then he would call the Revolutionary Army. Oh, God's Dragon and Koala were so going to kill him, and then contact Ace. And afterwards, he would meet up with the revolutionaries. Shifting forwards a bit, Sabo poked his head through the bars of his dingy little cell and scanned the area. He didn't know his way around the ship after all. It was uncharted territory, but his observation hockey could help with that. He did know how to hide his presence and how to stay in the shadows as well. Years of practice with the revolutionaries had come with that. Breathing through his nose, Sabo bent the bars enough to slip through, darting to a shadowy corner. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears as he listened for any signs of life. When he heard none, he used his observation hockey. The ship seemed to be pretty big, and Sabo noted a couple men on the upper decks. Scanning for any possible escape routes, Sabo edged forwards. He could jump over the side of the ship, which would be absolute suicide, or run and pray that there were lifeboats on the edge of the ship. If there weren't, well, he was screwed. Or, a new thought popped into Sabo's head. He could find the communication rooms and contact Dragon first, letting him know of his situation. He would need to find navigation first though to figure out where they were heading. But to save all the trouble, he could locate the workshop and obtain the ship's blueprints. It would just make his life easier. Sabo knew that a ship as big as this would have to have those 3 rooms. And afterwards, he could head back to his cell and act like a good little prisoner, pretending he was cuffed and all. His other 2 methods of escape were liable to end in death or being caught. Sabo deemed the third option the most reasonable. Spreading his field of observation over most of the ship, Sabo checked each room one by one, footsteps quiet and presence hidden. Sticking to the shadows, he eventually found the workshop. The problem was someone was already in there. Cursing, Sabo slipped into the room. He picked up a saw conveniently laying on the table nearby. It was better for slicing, not stabbing, but it would work. Sabo had a decent knowledge of human anatomy, understanding where exactly to stab people so they wouldn't scream. Stepping forward, Sabo sliced open the man's throat, easily cutting through his jugular, windpipe, and vocal cords. The man opened his mouth to scream, but it came out as a silent gurgle. Blood dribbled out of his mouth and the light faded out of his eyes. Sabo had minimized the blood flow to a minimum, but the damage was already done. Thankfully, he had done it clean enough so there were no blood stains around. Rest in peace, Sabo murmured softly as the man breathed his last. Dragging the man's body, Sabo checked that the coast was clear before throwing his corpse overboard, saw still embedded in his throat. Watching his body disappear into the waves with barely a ripple, Sabo walked back to the workshop and grabbed the blueprints to the damn ship. He made his way to navigation, sprinting up a staircase and turning left into a hallway. No one was in there, thankfully, and glancing at the destination, some Whitebeard pirate territory. It was called Port Gibraltar Island. Oh well, all the better for him. Sabo made his way to communications, grabbing a poor den snoozing innocently on the table. It was one that was untraceable, pretty rare, but why did they have 20 of them? Whatever. They wouldn't notice. Hopefully. Sabo walked back to an unoccupied storage room, quietly dialing the number he'd memorized by heart. After a few rings, someone picked up. It sounded like Joanne. "Hey," Sabo muttered into the snail. "It's Sabo. Sabo!" Exclamation mark. The other shrieked. "Where the hell have you been?" Exclamation mark. Question mark. Exclamation mark. Quote. Repressing a groan, said person pinched the bridge of his nose with a gloved hand. "I kind of got caught up in something." There was a good 20 seconds of silence from the other end of the line before Joanne spoke again. "Sabo," she said dangerously, "you didn't get kidnapped again, did you?" Quote. "That was only 3 times. And that didn't answer my question." Quote ellipsis dot. "Okay, so I may or may not have gotten, momentarily held back by a pirate crew and some asshole named Doc Q, but that doesn't count as a kidnapping." Quote ellipsis quote. "Also I am most definitely in a safe and secure area and not on the ship." Sabo. Quote. The blonde gulped nervously. "Okay, I might need help. Theoretically. Hypothetically." Joanne let out an exasperated sigh. "I am going to strangle you with my own 2 hands when you get back. After that you can face the wrath of Dragon and Koala." Another awkward pause. Then Joanne cursed heavily, swear word after swear word. Sabo stared at the snail, confused and slightly concerned. "Shit," Joanne groaned. "They already left." "Who?" Sabo gripped the receiver. "Who left?" "Dragon, Koala, Hack, and some other revolutionaries. You were off the radar for days, Sabo. Did you think they were just going to sit around and wait for you to come back?" Joanne clicked her tongue. "Where are they now?" Quote. "They're heading to your last known location. The Moby Dick. I'm trying to contact them now, but they're not picking up." "Aw, fuck," Sabo cursed. "Listen, this ship is heading to Port Gibraltar Island. I'll wait until we reach there, then make a break for it. I don't know how many days until we reach it, so as soon as we dock I'm going to make a break for it." "All right," Joanne said. "Good luck. Keep your snail on you." Sabo gave a final nod before hanging up. After making his way back to his lovely little cell, he bent the bars back to their original shape. He was careful not to leave any evidence of his little excursion around the ship. Sabo found a loose panel in the floor. How convenient. He hid the blueprints of the ship and the transponder snail in it, then put it back to its former shape. Settling against the wall, Sabo closed his eyes and groaned. It was going to be a long week. Over the bend, entirely bonkers. You like me best when I'm off my rocker. Tell you a secret, I'm not alarmed. So what if I'm crazy? The best people are. Thatch sighed as he cut up the vegetables that would be used in that night's chicken broth. His mind kept wandering back to that note he'd read in Ace's room. Although he tried to ignore it, deep down he felt a cold sense of unease in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right about this. Distracted, Thatch cursed heavily as he cut one of his fingers with the knife. Glaring at the blood on the knife and finger, he sucked the wound. Marco would not approve. "Need some help there, Thatch?" Exclamation mark. One of his subordinates called out from the other side of the counter. His name was Aaron. "No thanks, I got it," Thatch sighed heavily. "It's not like you to be this careless," Aaron responded, an underlying hint of concern seeping into his tone. "What's on your mind? Come on, spill. It's obvious you're brooding over something. You always wear your heart on your sleeve after all." Quote. Thatch smiled a bit. "Am I really that obvious?" "Yep," one of the other members in his division replied. "Ah, shut up," Thatch snorted, although it was clear he wasn't really mad. "It's probably nothing." Okay, Aaron said, going back to his work. "You should probably go to the infirmary. Wouldn't want your blood to get in the soup." Thatch huffed, jutting out his lower lip petulantly. "I'm not that careless," says the man who wasn't watching where he was going and fell overboard into an area infested with piranhas. "We don't mention that." A few minutes later, Thatch walked to the infirmary to get his wound treated. It didn't really hurt, but apparently it could get infected and yada yada yada. His mind wandered back to Ace's notes, and in an attempt to comfort himself, he considered the possibilities of Ace being out of his mind. Although he knew that wasn't the case. A more sinister feeling curled in his gut. Captain. One of the newer recruits, Nathan, had raced down from one of the many lookout posts. Waving his binoculars around haphazardly in one of his hands, he frantically jumped up and down, attempting to get Whitebeard's attention. The older pirate looked down, eyes crinkling as he smiled. "It's just Pops to you, son." "Oh, right," Nathan said, momentarily forgetting the current problem. He dropped his hands down. "What is it, son?" Nathan, face paled slightly. "I think there is something that you should see." All the other crew members out on deck had stiffened, distracted from their tasks. Their gaze was directed towards the sky, where the clouds began to darken at an alarming pace. The sky grew darker, as if it were nighttime. But that wasn't right. It was in the middle of the day. Someone yelled, "Sound the alarms." Quote. All hell broke loose as someone pulled the rope which rang the bell mechanism. It was connected to many other bells in the ship, all of them eliciting a jarring, sharp sound simultaneously. Almost immediately, a couple of the commanders scrambled out on deck in an easy, practiced formation. Ushering the younger, weaker crew members below deck, they stood at attention by Whitebeard's side. There were pirates on either side of the ship, each gripping a rope as if their life depended on it, which it did. They were ready to boost the turn of the ship at any given moment. Jozu was already at the wheel. Rain began to steadily pelt down like bullets. Lightning flashed and crackled in the air. Whitebeard raised a single hand, and everyone froze, ready for the order to be given. "Hold!" he commanded, authoritative voice booming in the air. Marco stood right next to him. Like his captain, he noted that something was different about this storm. It didn't seem exactly natural, almost artificial. Squinting in the distance, Whitebeard noticed that there was a ship in the middle of all the chaos. It seemed completely unaffected and unharmed by all the ruckus occurring around it. But his main focus was the man standing on the ship, a green cloak billowing out behind him. Lightning flashed again, and the man's face was illuminated to reveal a sort of red tribal tattoo on one side of his face. Beside him stood a brunette wearing a pink cap and a fishman wearing a judo outfit. Marco's brow furrowed as he recognized the faces from the newspapers. The other commanders tensed, ready to fight at any moment. The crew members at the ropes gulped, some gripping the rope so tight that their knuckles turned white. Unlike some of the others, Whitebeard didn't panic. On the contrary, he grinned. Now why exactly has the leader of the Revolutionary Army come to visit? Gararararararara! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Quote. Omake. Ace has had some pretty big connections already. First, the second in command of the Revolutionary Army, who just so happens to be his brother. Then there is Shanks, a Yonko of the sea. A Yonko. Thatch drunkenly waved his hand. And now, Thatch slurred a bit, and now Dragon. The leader of the Revolutionary Army. One of the most wanted men in the world. What's next? The Pirate King. Quote. Namur rolled his eyes. Don't be ridiculous, Thatch. Marco snorted. Thatch was way too drunk for his own good. Seriously, although Ace had some insane connections, there was absolutely no way Ace could be connected to the Pirate King. The very notion was completely and utterly ridiculous. Gosh diddly arnett, Thatch, Izu said. Time for you to go to bed and shut the hell up. The rest of the commanders roared with laughter, as Thatch angrily puffed out his chest, waving a bottle of booze around. If only they knew. Omake too. Ace didn't want this. He didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve any of their kindness, any of his family's unrelenting persistence into getting him to join, into integrating him into their family. So many things had derailed from their place, so many pieces have fallen out of the game. Whoopee.
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Apologies for all those quotes, exclamation marks, question marks, and mispronunciations. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. See you next time, my dear faves.